everyone, I am super excited on this marvellous Monday to be able to review the latest Marvel Legends Retro Spider-Man action figure set, which is of course the Green Goblin and Mary Jane Watson. If you're a long-time viewer of my channel, you'll no doubt be aware that I'm a huge fan of the Marvel animated series from the 1990s, and the Spider-Man cartoon was probably my absolute favourite alongside the X-Men. As a kid, I collected the Toy Biz line that was based on this series, and I always loved the fantastic card art that they used that Hasbro have recreated here. Recently, Hasbro seems to have moved away from the single-carded, single-peg releases that we've had in this line so far and moved more towards these sets, 2-packs of figures that are plastic-free and have 2 figures within. Of course, we had the Spider-Man and Carnage 2-pack, we had the Doc Ock and Aunt May 2-pack, and I've covered both of these on my channel previously. And whilst the Toy Biz line never really offered packaging like this, the design, layout and aesthetic, and indeed some of the images, are taken directly from that line, which is absolutely fantastic and wonderful to see. Both of these characters did actually have releases in the Toy Biz line. You can see the Green Goblin on the left here, obviously adopting that traditional single card approach with the bubble blister packaging there. And then on the right hand side we see the only Mary Jane that I could find that was based on the animated series in her obviously yellow and blue fatigues. That was released as part of a special Marvel Famous Couples set. So whilst the images they've used are slightly different, the Green Goblin is definitely an image that was associated with the animated series at the time. I think this looks absolutely glorious. I love the background image of the city. This brings back such warm memories. This purple hues across the rooftops just looks really colourful, really fun, and yeah, it definitely tickles the nostalgia bone for me. I love seeing the animated series Spider-Man logo at the top of the packaging as well. And I think this is a relatively new rendering, a new image of MJ. I don't actually recognise this image from the time, but it is definitely in keeping with the style and it's fairly consistent with the overall aesthetic of what they definitely would have achieved on those billboard images that we used to see on this line's packaging. So I think this looks really colourful. I think this in itself is really presentable, it looks really fun. You could definitely stack this up with the other 2 sets that have been released in the series so far, and they look really colourful and very fun next to each other. And then if we look at the side panels, on one side we have the Spider-Man logo and these 2 billboards of the 2 character images once again replicated here. This looks fun and colourful, quite a nice way to stack these up on the shelf if you stack them up on the side, but you can also flip this, and on the other side we have the VHS design approach, which will be very familiar for anyone who's collected the X-Men animated series releases over the last few years. For those who are building a collection and mixing their universes up between their Spider-Man figures and their X-Men, this is going to be pretty attractive because you can really stack these up now and have a pretty consistent look and design and feel across your packaging. And then finally we have the reverse the packaging. Now over half this packaging is really dedicated to the small print and the text, which is a little bit disappointing, but we do have these 2 fantastic images of the toys themselves on that sort of billboard sort of approach that they've taken in the past. I think this looks really good. Again, I really love the consistency of the look and feel and aesthetic of the original card art that we saw from Toy Biz all those many years ago. I think it still looks striking even today and is really colourful and really fun. The images themselves are really exciting. I think they've gotten really cool poses. I do think these are digital renderings as opposed to photographs, but they're very close. It's actually hard to tell them apart, but these look great. It's still quite displayable, however that small print is a little bit off-putting, I think. Opening the packaging is fairly easy. There is a top lid that you can simply flip open and then pull out the interior card that holds the figures in place. I'm not a huge fan of this approach. I've complained about this on many videos. The bits and pieces aren't securely held. They obviously fall out as soon as you open them, and the figures themselves, once you remove them from their rice paper, are kind of difficult to put back into position. Okay, so let's start off with Mary Jane. Now, whilst I certainly had my criticisms of the Aunt May figure that came along with Doc Ock, I have to say I have a soft spot for Mary Jane, and this actually is a character and a figure that I do want because she's such an important central character to Spider-Man's universe. And it's really pleasing to me to see Hasbro take the effort and the initiative to make sure that this is an animated series specific and accurate version of this character. They haven't just recycled an existing Mary Jane figure. This seems to be pretty much brand new from what I can tell. And I have to say, I think they've done an excellent job with the sculpting and the paint apps and the colours that they've used on this figure. Now, one thing I do have to point out straight off the bat is that they haven't decided to employ any cell shading on this figure, and they seem to be moving away from that with the Spider-Man line, something they're heavily invested in with the X-Men animated series line. We're not seeing an awful lot of that here. That might be a good or bad thing depending on your point of view. Personally, I don't really mind which approach they adopt. I just want it to be consistent across the board, and I do actually have a bit of fondness for the cell shading. But nevertheless, this is a pretty nice rendering of what we see on screen. I think they've done a really good job of replicating the sculpt, the hair, the overall appearance, and the costume. And it is funny having this figure in hand, because the costume they opted to put her in the animated series is a little bit strange. I think it's highlighted by this figure, sort of just how bright and colourful the character is. But hey, it's very screen accurate, and I think they've done a very nice job with it. There's no real paint washes to speak of, there's nothing running through the hair, there's nothing running through the body particularly. There's a little bit of cell shading where the buttons would be, but this is all pretty much achieved through the plastics as opposed to any paint washes. This feels more appropriate with an animated series character. If this was a comic book character, then I probably would be criticising it, saying it needed a bit of a wash to give it more depth and texture. But as this is an animated series, this definitely replicates what we see on screen. It's bright, it's colourful, and I don't think it needs any kind of washes. I think this works perfectly well on its own. Looking at the articulation, and she does have a ball joint at the top of the neck there, and she actually has a surprising range of motion in the head. She's able to move it side to side, lean it left and right, and even nod it down if not all the way up. So that plastic hair is not too much of a hindrance at all, which is really nice to see. Now she has ball joints in the shoulders, of course, so those arms will lift up and out. Sadly, she does just have the single swivel at the lower forearm, so that can rotate all the way around, and it will hinge to about 90 degrees. It's a real shame they haven't given her the double jointed elbow that we've seen on some of the other female characters lately, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. She does have a swivel at the wrist, of course, so the hand will rotate all the way around, and it will hinge forwards and backwards, although it is a little bit stiff. Now she has a ball joint in the top of the torso, so she can move from side to side, lean left and right a pretty good distance, and she can bend forwards and backwards as well. She has ball joints in the hips, of course, the legs will kick out to the side. There's also a complementary thigh swivel at the very top there, and then there is another swivel at the top of the boot cut as well, so that boot will move from side to side. The legs, of course, will kick forwards, they'll kick backwards. There's a double joint at the knee, so that lower leg can kick all the way back there, which is great. And then there is an ankle pivot as well, so that foot will hinge forwards and backwards. It will rock from side to side, and it can also bend from left to right. Accessories wise, well, she's very, very light. All she has is an additional pair of hands. So she can have 2 closed fists or 2 open hands. Yeah, this is a little bit disappointing. I can't think of what accessories they could have given her, but surely they could have given her a bag or something from those 5 seasons of the animated series. There must have been some accessory, even though I'm drawing a blank right now. There must have been something they could have given her. This feels a little bit limiting and a bit disappointing. Maybe an alternate head with a different expression would have been quite cool. But as it stands, this is a little bit basic. So overall, I'm going to give this figure 3 stars. All in all, it's a pretty nice figure. I can't really fault it too much. The articulation works, it's pretty functional. There's actually a good range of motion in all the key joints, so you can get some good poses out of this character. I think the overall look and aesthetic is definitely screen accurate, which is really nice to see. It's definitely a very specific version of Mary Jane, which I'm really pleased to have in the collection. But all that being said, there's still something ever so slightly underwhelming and a little bit disappointing about this figure. And I think it would have been enhanced greatly if there'd been some really fun accessory, something unique to the animated series. It doesn't even necessarily need to be specific to Mary Jane, but something to just flesh out this figure, this release a little bit more. Maybe an alternate head or something like that. Just something to make this a bit more fun and interesting. Okay, so moving on to one of my all-time favourite characters, not just in comic books, but also in the animated series. It is, of course, the Green Goblin, and I never had this figure as a child despite desperately wanting him, so this is very, very overdue, and it's fantastic to have a screen-accurate animated series Green Goblin. I actually really love this design of the Green Goblin. I love the colours they've used, and I think they've done a tremendous job of capturing the likeness, particularly in in the face and the head sculpt. I think this is just absolutely spot on. If we look at the detailing here, I just think it's uncanny actually from this particular frame. This is a fantastic reference point because it's spot on. I can't say enough good things about it. Once again, there's no real washes running through this figure at all. As I've said, I think that's kind of appropriate for the animated series, although I think cell shading would have been quite nice. It's definitely not required. I think they've done a really good job with this. In particular, I really like how they've captured his hat. This is very different to any other Marvel Legends Green Goblin we've ever had before. Usually it's quite thin, whereas this is a very thick, robust hat and a very different shape to what we've seen previously. And I think this works really well. It gives this particular version of the character its own identity, and it also is a brand new mold, obviously a brand new sculpt, which is really appreciated to have something different in the collection. So I think this is really good. I have nothing but good things to say about this sculpt overall. Now, if we look at the body sculpt, this will be very familiar to a lot of you who picked up, say, the Hobgoblin figure that was released as part of this retro line not too long ago, around about this time last year, in fact. This is pretty much identical. There's a few minor tweaks here and there. Obviously, the belt is different, and that's new to this figure. I don't think we've seen this before. This is a separate piece, which is great, so it's giving it a little bit more texture. Nicely painted. We can actually see some detailing on the buckle there, for example. But the actual body type itself is essentially recycled from that Hobgoblin figure. I think that's perfectly appropriate. I think that works very well. Obviously there is no shading, there's no cell shading on this, as we already touched on. It is just molded in the base mold plastic, but as I said, I think that works very well for the animated series. I have no issues with that. It's bright, it's colourful, and I think the overall shape and size and dimensions work really well in this figure, so I have no issues with this. I do have some minor gripes though, and that is really around the types of material they've used on the joints, because although it's a plastic, this feels like a rubberized plastic, and it's definitely an issue in the arms in particular when it comes to using the articulation, because there is a sense that they are warping, that they might tear, that they might snap off. They don't move very easily. And I do feel very uncomfortable when posing this figure because I don't want to damage it. And I don't usually have that feeling with my Marvel Legends figures from Hasbro, but this is definitely starting to creep in with a few figures I've had lately, and I don't like this texture, this material they're using, because it just feels like they might damage, they might break. In fact, so much so that when I bend the arm, I can actually see sort of white, a white sort of moulding appearing when I bend that plastic, which is a little bit worrying. It's always a sign that something's about to snap off. So looking at the articulation, and there is a ball joint at the top of the neck there, so the head can move all the way around, it can lean left and right, and yes, it can also nod up and down a pretty healthy distance too, and that hat is no hindrance, which is absolutely fantastic stuff. Now there are ball joints in the shoulders, so of course the arms will lift up and out. There is a complementary bicep swivel, and there we have the double joints at the elbow there as well. As you can see, this is a little bit resistant, it's a little bit rubbery, which is makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. There is a swivel at the wrist, of course, so that hand will rotate all the way around and it will hinge forwards and backwards nice and easily. Now there is a straight swivel at the waist, and there is an ab crunch in the centre of the chest as well. This is absolutely fine, it's functional, but it would have been nice if we'd had a ball joint in the torso instead. Now, there are ball joints in the hips though, and those legs will kick out. There is a complementary thigh swivel at the top of the leg there, and then there is another swivel at the top of the boot cut as well. Now, the legs will kick forwards, they'll kick backwards. There's a double joint at the knee, of course, lifting that lower leg all the way back there, and then we have an ankle pivot at the ankle as well. So, of course, that foot will hinge forwards, backwards, and it will arc left and right as well. Okay, so the Green Goblin fares a lot better when it comes to accessories. He comes with his satchel, a pumpkin bomb, an alternate Norman Osborn head, and his glider. Now I should point out that this isn't the first Green Goblin figure we've had in the Marvel Legends line. It's not even the first Green Goblin we've had in the retro Spider-Man animated series line. And we can see that some of these accessories have been used before, but we can see there's some key differences here. For example, if we look at the two gliders and put them side by side, obviously one, the earlier release was very much a comic book version of the Green Goblin glider, whereas this is much more animated series accurate. And then we have these two alternate heads as well. As you can see, this is a brand new sculpt of Norman Osborn, and yeah, I think this is appropriately very, very different. Whilst we've had all of these accessories before and across numerous different goblins and different versions of the same goblins across the years, I think this works really well. I can't think of anything extra I would want to give this particular character. He's got everything I would want. He's got the Norman Osborn head, he's got the pumpkin bomb, he's got his glider, he's got his satchel. It's pretty definitive, really. I think this is everything you could want for this character, and of course they're tweaked to be accurate to the animated series version, and I think this works really, really well. So these accessories are really nice. They offer a lot of different looks and opportunities to create interesting poses with the character, and I do appreciate the Norman Osborn head. I'm not sure it's 100% accurate to what we see on screen, but I think it's a really good attempt, and I appreciate the making the efforts there and putting the extra paint apps around the darkness of the eyes, etc. I think this works really well, and I think this is a really good looking figure all in all. It looks absolutely fantastic on display. It's so colourful, it's so bright, and I'd probably say it's actually my favourite Green Goblin in the Marvel Legends line to date. As a point of comparison though, to show how this version differs so wildly from previous versions, here is that other Green Goblin figure that was released as part of the Spider-Man retro line a good couple of years ago now. At the time I really like this figure. I still like it. I still think it's a really good comic book version of the Green Goblin, but you can see the massive differences between the two. For starters, obviously the earlier version has that sort of chain mail effect on his arms and on his legs. The boots are a very different style, likewise so are the arms, the gauntlets, and even the torso, and especially when we look at this head sculpt, it's dramatically different. As you can see, a very different expression, but also a very different approach to the hat, the tail on the hat there, being a lot narrower, a lot thinner, harder plastic. So you can see very, very strikingly different to what has come before. And then here he is standing next to the Dr. Octopus from this very same line that was released just a few months ago. As you can see, they scale quite nicely against each other and they look really bright and colourful. And this is fast shaping up to be my favourite Marvel Legends subline. I really love the animated series. This brings back a lot of happy memories for me. And having these figures, these specific versions of these characters, is an absolute joy. Okay, so for the Green Goblin, I'm going to give this figure 4 stars, and I was so desperate to give it 5 stars because I love it so much and I think it's such a great figure. I'm really, really happy with this release, but I had to knock a star off because there's definitely some issues here that I have to address. First and foremost, I have to say that I'm just very disconcerted by the choice of materials they're using for the arms. There was a little bit of this with Dr. Octopus as well. There's just a slight rubbery quality to these joints that make me very nervous when it comes to moving them and articulating them and putting them in different poses. This isn't a feeling I like to have, and I desperately do not want to break these or tear the joints or have any damage happen to them. So that's never a great feeling when you feel a little bit nervous about touching your collection after spending so much money on it. So I definitely have to knock off a star for that. But I also have to note that I think they've missed an opportunity here to improve on the articulation of this body more, particularly in the torso. I think if they'd put a ball joint in the top of the torso or in the waist, this would have definitely improved the overall aesthetic and look of the figure, so it wouldn't have that big unseemly sort of ab crunch that we see at the moment, and it just would have been a bit more smooth in terms of its posability, and it's a little bit clunky at the moment. This feels like a little bit of a backwards step, which is unfortunate, and I think it just could have been tweaked, because we do know that that joint is out there. It's been used to great success on various Spider-Man figures, for example, and I would have liked to have seen that here as well. But these are very minor gripes. Overall, this is still a really solid figure. And I have to say, of the 3 sets that have been released like this so far, this is my favourite of the 3. I really like this 2-pack. I feel like you're getting good value for money here in the sense that we're getting a proper brand new sculpts. We're seeing brand new characters, well, brand new variants of characters, I should say, that are animated series specific, and I think they're bright, they're colourful, and they work really, really well. I think this is, for me personally, most wanted character, having the Green Goblin. Very happy to have Mary Jane as well. So I think this looks really good. This is a really nice set, and probably the best value for money so far. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.